Hi, I'm Beth with American Patchwork and Quilting, and today I wanted to share our favorite technique for joining the ends of your binding when you're finishing your quilt. And this is a technique that I go back to every time I am working on binding. So I've got my quilt back from the long arm quilter and I've sewn my binding around most of the quilt, and so now I'm ready to join the ends. You'll want to leave a good amount of binding unsewn so you have the room to manipulate the pieces. And if you find you didn't leave enough, you can always remove some stitches just to give yourself a little more slack. So what you want to do is overlap the two strips, and then you're going to measure and mark an overlap of the width of your binding. So this is a 2.5 inch binding, so we will want a 2.5 inch overlap. Now it's tempting to just go, oh, okay, here's the end, I'll measure over 2.5, cut that, but then you don't have a lot of room on this one side, so you want to try to center that overlap in your opening as much as possible. And then I also recommend pulling it a little bit tighter when you're measuring and marking, because if you're loosely laying it here, I find that a lot of times it's just a little bit too big and you'll get a pucker when you go to sew this down. So I trimmed the bottom strip here to about halfway, and then I will layer this over. Again, make sure you're pulling it a little bit taut. I'm just offsetting it just a little bit so I can see where the edge of that strip is, so I can measure over my 2.5 inches and then mark. And then I can trim on that line. So I've trimmed that. Next, what you'll do is unfold your binding and kind of bring it towards you. And this side is going to go right side up. Make sure you don't twist the binding when you're doing this. And this side is going to go right side down, so the right sides are going to be together and they're going to go perpendicular to each other. Now it's not going to go easily, so you sometimes have to pull your quilt a little bit so that you can get enough slack so that you can line those up. Then you want to take a small ruler and mark a diagonal line across where these intersect. I like to use my 45-degree line on my ruler, so I make sure I get that nice and straight. And then use a marking tool to mark that line. And then you want to put a couple of pins on either side of the line, so that way that doesn't come apart when you go to take that to your sewing machine. I've sewn on the drawn line and removed the pins, and then once it's sewn, before cutting, I like to just preview it to make sure it's correct and not twisted. So just kind of fold it flat, make sure that it is in fact going to lay flat, it's not twisted, and then if it's not right, you can seam rip that seam and try again. So I've definitely had that happen before, and it's an easy fix before you cut it. So once you've determined it's right and looks like it will lay flat, this looks good, then you can trim that excess off to 1/4 inch away from the seam. Now I just like to finger press this open. You could take it to your ironing board and press it, but I think this works fine. So finger press, fold it on the original fold, and then you can line it back up and complete your stitching. And that's it, you're done. Here's the finished join. This is a pretty easy technique, and it's sure to be one you'll use over and over again.